we're going to start in the Premier League. It was a Premier League double here on Foxpunter Manager Profiling last week, and we're staying in the division to really focus, I think, on the man behind one of the most remarkable stories of the season. You've got your usual protagonists up there, and Leicester. West Ham have gatecrashed the top four, Mike, and they are playing some superb stuff along the way. And the man at the helm is David Moyes. West Ham fans didn't particularly want him. A lot of people had written him off as well before he'd even managed his first match at the club. But this is some way to restore your reputation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite fitting now that at the end of a really bizarre season, when so many different teams have had the 15 minutes of fame, we've all sort of eulogized over Leeds and Aston Villa and all, different teams at various points. But the last one standing at the end of the season that hardly anyone's talked about, only briefly, fleetingly. And now as we get into the business end of the season, there's one of these surprise interlopers left standing, and it's West Ham and it's David Moyes. And I think that speaks volumes about the way he goes about his business. Under the radar, consistent, long-term compound effects. And I think it's all there now at West Ham. And this is a manager, who I guess it's a big sense of redemption for him because, after the Manchester United job, it's obviously been very, very difficult for him for a number of years. And then he kind of got typecast as this firefighter type manager that was called upon to get teams out of trouble and was never really given a shot of, a longer term project where he said last season, I remember after lockdown last season and West Ham got themselves out of trouble. They had a good run of results in the post-lockdown football. And Moyes made the point a few times, I just want to get past this season because I want to do what I've not been able to do for a long time, and that's build something. I see myself as a manager that puts in place an infrastructure that takes charge of an entire club, so to speak, very much in the mould of an Alex Ferguson, what Alex Ferguson did at Old Trafford, and which was why Alex Ferguson saw him as the ideal replacement because he had a handle on everything. And, and I think West Ham are a club that, at boardroom executive level can't necessarily be trusted to do the right things. And if they can get one guy into who kind of takes care of everything, well, the recruitment's been excellent and he's got his handle on all these departments and everything's just ticking along nicely and he's slowly building something like what he had at Everton all over again.
Yeah, and I was about to ask you about the typecast that I think he has been given. Now, it became a bit of a joke at one point, certainly after his spell at Manchester United. But this is a man who, if you go back over the last, 11, 12, 13 years, he's got a terrific body of work. And he is often lumped in, and it's quite lazy, this, Mike, but when you see it often on social media, people saying, one of those Premier League managers that does the circuit, your Alan Pardew's, your Sam Allardyce's, Tony Pulis's, they come in and they save clubs, like you say. But many of those are firefighters, and Moyes is certainly not in that bracket. He needs time to build. And one thing I've sort of noticed as well that he's done at West Ham is he's found solutions as well. He may not have had the right players in those positions at the start of the season. But what he does is he works out, Pablo Fornals as well, one of those players that's come in and been superb in that midfield role, been somewhat compared to, Tim Cahill and Stephen Pienaar, what they did at Everton under Moyes. But he just finds those pieces, doesn't he? And fits together the jigsaw. And then when it clicks, it really clicks.
Yeah, I think he looks for consistency is the key thing. I think when you sign for David Moyes as a player, I think he furthers a lot of players' careers. And the way and the manner in which he does it is he gives them all a foundation of, he guarantees them consistency of team selection, consistency. He just gets players into a place where, I'll give you everything you need I need you to deliver me 7 out of 10 performances every week. And then with confidence, you'll up your levels. But I just need a baseline off you every single week. In terms of commitment, you stick to the blueprint and the brief that I give you. Just make sure you do the basics well. And players come on and they begin to express themselves more and more as they play under his tutelage, because they, once they get those basics nailed down and they've got that trust, that element of faith between manager and player, the players are just allowed to go and express themselves and go and play the best football because they're not necessarily fearing for he just makes them comfortable in the lifestyles, in the day-to-day environment, in the position in the team, in what's being asked of them tactically and things like that. And he kind of molds the team to suit the individuals as well to some extent, you know. So there's all these elements at play, but it's generally all underpinned by this theme of consistency. I want consistency out of you, and I'll give you consistency in your career, and make sure that you know this becomes a prolonged period of your career that you enjoy, and you will look back on as, you know, that was part of the making of me as a player. So yeah, I think consistency is the key word.
And a lot of players have gone on, you know, particularly from that Everton squad, and not really done it elsewhere, have they, Mike? So it is all about that right environment, and you have to be the right player for that role. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when Moyes leaves or you depart and go elsewhere, you're able to follow it up. It's something about working under Moyes that means that he gets those levels out of you.
Yeah, I think his recruitment's been good as well, though I think that's underestimated. Yet at the same time, yeah, I agree. When players leave, you know, there's a lot of players whose best years have all been under David Moyes, and it's, you know, it's because he gives them that. Yeah, it's just the environment. It's the foundations and the structure that they need to just go out and play their best football every week. But yeah, I think the problem with him in recent years is that this all comes from, you know, again, we go back to compound effects. It comes from, you know, it's a slow build process. It's not something that he's not a manager that brings in overnight transformation, which is why it was a bit absurd that he got typecast as this firefighter, because it was quite clear that he was out of his depth at Manchester United in that first season. And I think he would admit that much himself. But he was only out of depth because he wasn't up to that job. He was out of his depth because it was his first season and it was all new. And he doesn't necessarily deal with novelty well. But once he gets his own foundations in place and things slowly but surely are done his way, then all of a sudden he begins to make better and better and better decisions over time. And, you know, the whole thing becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
Is pressure a problem then? Does that weigh on his shoulders? Obviously, there was a heck of a lot at Manchester United. I can't think of a job really in the Premier League other, you know, outside of, you know, maybe managing, you know, Liverpool, Manchester City in the Champions League. There comes with the pressures of following in the footsteps of Sir Alex Ferguson and being asked, right, off you go, follow on from that legacy, you know. And then, of course, at Sunderland as well, regardless of who you follow at Sunderland, there is always a huge amount of pressure on you at the Stadium of Light. Now, as I said at the start, West Ham fans weren't particularly keen on Moyes, but they also didn't necessarily expect him to be doing this. I guess they kind of said, keep us up, see what you can do. And that lack of pressure has allowed him to go on and build. But do you think he feels that when he's managing?
I don't think he's scared of pressure. I think he's perfectly happy to take pressure on. I think the Manchester United job was dropped on him, and it was very, very daunting prospect. It kind of almost happened overnight. It sounded almost as if there was a conversation with Alex Ferguson, and within a few days he was announced Manchester United manager, and it all kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, that is the hardest job of the Premier League era, without a shadow of a doubt. Not just following Sir Alex Ferguson, but also the state of the squad he was left with. You know, it wasn't. I mean, that last season under Ferguson was remarkable how Ferguson got so many points out of Manchester United that season, out of that Manchester United team. And then what he left behind was all these aging players that were trying to defend their position in the team. You know, your Patrice Evras and Rio Ferdinands and those types of players who were probably over the hill, past it. Yet I think there was a lot of trouble caused behind the scenes because they knew that the way that David Moyes wanted to take it wasn't going to suit them and wasn't good for their careers. And they potentially had more power than he had at the time. So it was a nightmare job, and it was a nightmare first year. And it would have been interesting, you know, as a City fan, you know, it was quite amusing at the time, and Moyes went along. But I'm curious to know what would have happened had Moyes stayed in position for 2 or 3 years, because now we're beginning to see with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at Manchester United what happens when a manager's just left to get along with the job, even when he's not necessarily measuring up for the most part of his first 2 years or so, you know, and you begin to get the compound effects of this. And this now under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, they see it, you know, he's been given the time that Moyes was never awarded. And with Moyes as a manager, that the more time you give him, the stronger and better the infrastructure and everything becomes over time.
You said before, Mike, he doesn't transform teams, but he has transformed a player. And I think it's worth a mention of Jesse Lingard, talking of the Manchester United link, who has arrived at West Ham. And I don't think his confidence could have been any lower when he pitched up in East London. But it hasn't taken long, has it, for David Moyes to get a tune out of him? And I guess that goes back to what you were saying before. Give this young player the right environment, tell him to do the basics and concentrate on his game, take him out of the spotlight as well of being at Manchester United, and look at what you get.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the right environment, I think we should also say as well, I think he has a great knack of making players feel no pressure whatsoever. You know, like I say, he never puts demands on. When I talk about this consistency in 7 out of 10 performances, he's not demanding 8 or 9 out of 10 performances. He's almost saying to a player, if I just get a kind of 7 out of 10, consistent 7 out of 10 performances out of you, I know I've got a player. I know you'll fit into what it is I'm trying to do. Everything will take care of itself. You don't worry about it. That's my problem, that everything fits together and that you know, I just want you to turn up and do the basics for me. And trust me, everything else will take care of itself. And I think he just relaxes players in that way. And I think that's what's you know, it's almost a transformation of Jesse Lingard and how quickly it has happened. But I'm sure that's the feel and the vibe that Lingard's getting as soon as he's come into the club, that there's no pressure on me. It's, you know, the determination's coming from with him. He clearly wants to prove a point, but he's not come in with any demands of, you know, that he's expected to step up to a certain mark. It's just, you come in and you be Jesse Lingard. I've bought you to be Jesse Lingard because I see something in you and I want you to get back to enjoying your football, playing your best football, and then, you know, it's up to you if you want to take it to another level beyond that, but I'll be happy enough with what you bring at, you know, at those 7 out of 10 standards.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's not spent an awful lot at West Ham either. So a lot of those players, you know, there's not a big price tag weighing on their shoulders either. Behind the scenes, Mike, then what do you get from David Moyes apart from the relaxing that you said? Is post-match interviews at times can perhaps be a little insipid. You know, he comes across fairly, I guess, I'm trying to think of what the word is. I mean, he comes across, you know, well, but he doesn't really offer much personality, does he, on a regular basis in the interviews? But behind the scenes, players always seem to really get on with him. He clearly enjoys what he does, and there's a side to him which he is able to sympathize and get on with the players, because he just, you know, he wasn't the most skillful player himself. He was a no-nonsense, uncompromising centre-half, and he had to graft for everything he got during his playing career. And I guess there's a lot of players who will look up to that. Yeah,
well, first and foremost, he's an introvert and he's a process man. And as such, what that means is he post-processes everything. He doesn't. So when he turns up to an interview, a post-match interview, he doesn't necessarily have his answers formulated of like what just happened in that game. He needs to go away and process this kind of stuff and then think, right, okay. And when I talk about reliability, it's the same thing. It's like you never just sort of rip up the blueprint and start again at any stage. It's always building on what's gone before. So you've got this body of work that you've done to date. Then you go away and you take your time to muse over it and have a think about how that last game panned out. How can we improve going forward? And it's very much incremental, step by step. You never run before you can walk. You never do too much at once, but you never take it backwards. You know, you're always incrementally inching forward on, you know, each. And this is what I'm saying about West Ham now, suddenly in this position in the top 4 as we're entering the final stretch of the season. You know, they've not shot into contention, dropped miles back, and, you know, these, because it goes hand in hand with Moyes' process and the way he goes about the job. It's very, very steady, very, very reliable, incremental progress. But we don't get to see the best of it via the media because he still hasn't got his head around what's just happened. When he goes to do his post-match interviews, you know, he doesn't really know what his conclusions are yet. He might play around with a few conclusions in that interview, but in the 24 to 48 hours after the game, I think he gets through a lot of work. He gets to understand things and it's always following the same blueprint. So it's always reinforcing what's already gone before. How can something be improved as opposed to, well, that didn't work, let's throw it out, let's change it, let's do this next week. No, it stays the same, but how can we make it better? And, you know, how can we just edge forward week after week after week after week? And then that's why you end up in this situation where you've got a team that's barely been talked about all season, with a budget that's nowhere near top four, suddenly in the top four.
As you talked about, though, it may be incremental, and the things that he does may be gradual, but he does have the knack of being very active during games. He's always quite animated on the touchline, and he's really not afraid to make subs, is he? And make the changes fairly early in the second half if he has to.
Yeah, I think that comes from experience. I mean, we are talking about a manager now, well over, it's the late 1990s. I remember him in charge of Preston North End. And, was a very, very good, kind of hit the ground running as a manager at League One, what is now League One Championship level. So, there's a big body of work behind him. There's not many scenarios he hasn't encountered and experienced. So I think that makes him a very confident sort of customer on the touchline. And when it comes to substitutions and things like that, and because he works to this blueprint that never really changes, in his mind, it's always the same principles. It makes it easier to make quick decisions when it comes to scenarios, within the context of matches, because there's not many scenarios he hasn't seen before now at this stage. So even though he is slow to process, he is kind of the sort of manager who will probably have his ducks in a row in advance of what, if this scenario happens, then these are the substitutions I'll make, and he'll probably have contingencies for all kinds of scenarios within a game. So he's very quick to react. I think if he didn't have them contingencies in place, I don't think he'd be anywhere near as quick to react. But it comes from all the experience he's had down the years, that he's kind of prepared for not just the scenario at the start of a game, but a variety of potential scenarios as the game unfolds.
Just going back to what you were saying about him being an introvert, does that make managing more difficult for him, or does it just come naturally to him? He was a bit of a leader on the pitch, and I guess he also is off the pitch as well. But I guess the introversion sort of plays out in many different forms, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think the main difference between introverts and extroverts when it comes to football management is just that introverts go away to think about, or they process internally, whereas extroverts just kind of let it all out in the not necessarily in the moment, but often in the moment. And then it's quickly forgotten, and it's not always taken seriously. And, there's pros and cons of both sides. And I think with an introvert I think what West Ham players, for example, will take, when David Moyes speaks to them, they know that he is, it's been thought through what that's being asked of them. This isn't just something, should I take that seriously or not? It's, that he's serious, that he's thought through what he's telling you. And that there's a great deal of substance to it, and it's not necessarily just off the cuff. So yeah, I'd say that's the major difference. I wouldn't say it's anything to do with easier or more difficult, confident or less confident, or anything like that. It's just that the processing is done internally, so that there's a filter there basically before information arrives at a player or an instruction arrives at a player. They know, and we know, but they know it's been filtered beforehand. It's that he'll never just kind of throw away lazy remarks and not really think it through in advance of speaking to players and letting players know what he wants from them.
And where does he go from here then? Because West Ham are in the top four. The season's not done yet. They can still get into that top three. It would be an extraordinary feat, but they're playing well enough to do it. How far can David Moyes take West Ham, do you think?
Well, I think again, I guess it comes back to consistency. And if we think back to his time at Everton, I think that's the main body of work, is that the main point of reference when you're thinking of David Moyes. And I don't think West Ham will necessarily ever do anything spectacular. If you say this isn't spectacular now, I think it clearly is to be in the top four. But I think that this is possibly about the ceiling, but to be able to keep doing it, top half finishes over and over again, European football across multiple seasons. If they stick with Moyes for long enough, I don't think this is the end of a European journey. I think they can go back and have another European journey. They might get a cup run. He's never really had a major cup run. I think he got to one or two FA Cup finals, and he's always kind of just fallen short in cup competitions. But I think it's clear from things he said, this season in charge of West Ham, I think he's desperate for a cup run and a cup, or to win a trophy and to win a cup competition. So yeah, I think that I think it's just more of the same. Surely West Ham fans have got to be happy with the potential that they could be having a 4, 5, 6 year stretch in front of them of mostly top half finishes, pushing for European places, maybe having a cup run from time to time. I think they're in a great place, and they're reaping the rewards of the compound effects of sticking by a manager like David Moyes, which nobody has since Manchester United.
Actually, I've got one more question. I said finally there, Mike. Scratch that. I've got one more question here for you. We talk about manager cycles, and we often say, 3 to 4 seasons is roughly how long managers have. But given his tenure at Preston and, the fact that his Everton spell ended because he was recruited by Manchester United, he was still doing rather well there at the time. Is David Moyes the exception to that? Could you get a good 5 or 6 seasons out of him?
I think at West Ham in this position, yes, absolutely. I think what's impressed me most about Moyes, and we've seen a lot of managers that had a lot of success in the 2000s have struggled with millennial players and have struggled moving into the new generation and the new type of play. We're hearing it time and time again about players not speaking to each other on the pitch. But, Mourinho's now come to realise himself that he's not of the same mind of the modern day player, and he can't quite get his head around it. David Moyes seems to have managed seamlessly, and I think that's credit to him, that he has, because he responds to change slowly but surely. I think it means that, he never jumps to conclusions and never jumps to judgments. So I don't think he has that level of conflict with the modern day player, but slowly but surely has begun to understand how they're different to the players that he had previously and how to adapt his methods to still connect with the modern day player. So I think that makes him an exception to most managers of his generation, of his era that started way before the generation of the modern player. So yeah, I don't see why not. And I think it's all, it's all credit to West Ham if they do stick back. They're in a very lucky position now, and I think they just need to stick with this because there's not many clubs that are in this position that have such a good fit for a manager and everything in place. It's just a case of not getting greedy and not getting jumpy if you have one poor season on the back of a good season, because I think that West Ham could get into Europe next season and have an iffy campaign in the Premier League because this is the bar that they're never going to live up to again next season. But that's not to say they can't come again the following season. The trouble is nowadays is people don't stick through those periods with a manager. They don't ride the rough with the smooth anymore like they used to. It's like, okay, that manager's, we've got our use out of him on to the next one. Who's the next guy? I think if they can stick with David Moyes, then I think there could be a good 4, 5, 6 year project in front of them.